In the 1980s, it was Europe with the final countdown, blowing everybody away. And Lace Out tonight are bringing you their final countdown, part 6 of our 2025 season previews for the final 3 teams, being the Sydney Swans, being the West Coast Eagles, and the Western Bulldogs. And joining me, as always, the great Thom Roker. Tommy, I'll tell you what, these 3 teams, various levels of expectations for the year from the pundits, but within, they'll be looking a little bit buoyant, either making finals or getting out of that bottom 2 that they pretty much survived in the last couple of years. Big fella, we're going to start with the Sydney Swans. Now, when it comes to the Sydney Swans, they've got to promise one thing and one thing only. They've got to get back on the horse. No pun intended. The great modern day poet once said, "It's a disaster, it's a catastrophe." And that's exactly what you would say about last Saturday in September for the Sydney Swans. They were demolished by Brisbane in the grand final. The Swans had lost their 4th consecutive grand final after a season where they went 15-1, losing to Richmond, if you can believe that. Then, completely imploding in the back half of the season to go 6-6 for the remainder of the season. To add to the misery, Premiership coach John Longmire hung up the whistle for long-standing assistant Dean Cox to take the reins of the hottest show in Sydney. The Swans need to stand up, dust themselves off, and jump back in the saddle of success and run like the wind, cowboy. Otherwise, it will be a slow canter into the sunset of disappointment for season 2025. They know they can do it, but do they really want it? I'm not sure. Thoughts, Tom?
Well, we know it can go one of 2 ways for clubs that get flogged in the grand final, don't we?
Yep.
So it won't surprise anybody if they slip down the ladder. I don't think they're going to be minor premiers again. I think they're going to have a pretty smooth transition with the new coach. And just from a little bit that I've seen in the preseason game they just played, they're still next man up. You know, they've got a deep list. They all of their players, they know the game plan. Excited to see actually what he kind of implement, because we know that since Buddy retired, haven't really got that forward target.
Yep.
And they're kind of getting a bit long in the tooth.
Yep.
But I'm still a bit buoyant about them. Because I just feel like they've got a really great culture in that team. And, you know, we'll obviously go through what we think of it in a more granular level. But, yeah, that Bloods culture, it comes through. I'm thinking they're still going to be around in September, just maybe not back on the last day.
Okay, so in my season preview with the J-Dog on earlier in the week, I picked them to finish 5th. My concern with them is their midfield was so strong throughout the year, they were virtually unbeatable. Yet, I have a bit of a worry about their forward setup. Now, McInerney going down there might be something that works out. Sorry, McCartan going down there might be the spark that they need. And Logan McDonald apparently going back might be the spark that he needs, even though he had a pretty good year in front of goals. But that midfield of Goulden, Warner, and Heaney was out of control. It was just, like, seriously, it was footy porn. Just to sit there and watch just how beautifully they move the ball. They were unbeatable, but for whatever reason, it gets towards the end of the season and they just implode. I don't know whether it's bigger grounds, whether it's the pressure of expectation, whether it's just a mental collapse, which is sort of hard to say because of the comeback that they had against GWS. To come back from 40-odd points down and win that, and then get to a grand final and not even shout one bit of defiance against Brisbane. It was... They've done that in the last 2 grand finals, and I do have a bit of a concern that if the deeper they go, the tighter the sphincter gets. I don't trust Amadi, Hayward, and McDonald as their key 3s. Amadi kicked 43 goals for the season, but he kicked 9 of those in a game. So for the remaining set of games that he played, He only kicked 34 more goals. So that's a bit of a... Okay, is he a key that you can rely on, even though he has looked okay in the preseason? Will Hayward kick 41?
42 goals. You'd average 2.5 goals if you're going to be a really, elite key forward. Yep. And, you can have your bags, and that brings your numbers up. But if you're not kicking a couple of snags, your team's probably not winning.
Yep, exactly right.
If you wind it, but I think in the big games, big players win big games. Big Joe Danaher helped them win through to win the grand final. You look back at every grand final team, and the big guys tend to, not always, but the big guys tend to be pretty prominent on the day.
Yeah. I just don't see any of those three ripping a game apart.
No.
But do they need to? I'm not scared of their forward line because they do kick a lot of goals and they do get a lot of supply coming in. But then you've got also Tom Plepley kicked 36, which I think is unders for him. I love everything that he brings. But then you've got Isaac Heaney kicked 34 himself. Is he going to have another year like that on the ball? Because that was out of control. You got Errol Goulden had 15 himself. You also had Chad Warner had 35. Now, we know Goulden's not going to be there for virtually half the season. So I wouldn't be too worried about the goal kicking aspect, but who's going to stand up in his place? That's a question that I'm not too sure I know who that's going to be. They are a team. Yeah, it'll definitely be something young. Here's the other thing. You've got, you have a look. They had 9 players last year play every single game. Brilliant. Okay. But you have a look at some of these names. Nick Blakey, Ollie Florent, Brodie Grundy getting on a little bit older. Errol Goulden, he's going to be injured. Will Hayward, hopefully he can have a bigger year down forward. You got James Jordan, who was really serviceable for them and sort of petered away towards the back end. Jake Lloyd, another year older. Logan McDonald, which end do we play? And we spoke about Hayden McLean already. So they had a lot of players who played a lot of games. Was that a bit of a detriment at the back end of the year? I don't think so. But you know what I mean? Like, there's all these little things. And when you go to their back line, they're 2 big key backs that they've had for the last almost 10 years are Dean Rampy and Jake Lloyd. Rampy's 34. Lloyd's turning 32 this year. Robbie Fox. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier before we got online. This is their 6 oldest players. Rampy, backman. Hamling, backman. Robbie Fox, backman. Taylor Adams, midfielder. Jake Lloyd, backman. And then you got Harry Cunningham, who can sort of be a bit of a swingman, but they've got him down as defender. So 5 out of the 6 players that they've had marked in their top bracket are backmen. And then you got Brodie Grundy just underneath that. That's where my concern with them is that their backline, yes, it's been restrictive. Yes, it is a bit of a fortress down there. But the difference from one year to the next for some players can come along that quickly. And if it hasn't, I don't know who's going to be able to step up and take over from them. I don't think it's going to be Callum Mills because he's injured all the time. I don't think it's going to be Lewis Malikan, and I don't think it's going to be Aaron Francis. So that's where I can sort of see. It's almost like the bookends are a bit of a concern, yet through the middle of the field, I love it.
I don't mind the Pelican. He's sort of one of those players who had a little bit of a mid-career kind of lull, but he came out of it last year when they called on him, and I think he'll keep doing the job.
Yep.
There's perennial questions around Aaron Francis. He had personal tragedy which affected his career and never ever reached the heights. But players who have that height and that ability and who are in that frame, that 27 to 30 frame, they often do take a step. And if you just have to be a big guy, and he's already big, he's not huge, but he's already big enough to take the Jack Darling types. and you can do your job and you can keep them goalless. Well, that's all they really want. And he can mark the footy. He can make a good spoil, and he can distribute the ball from the back line. So I don't feel like they're really looking for a superstar when they brought him in because he was a VFL player.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm not bullish on Melican and Francis as a sort of a back line, but they never really seem to have superstars. Tom McCartan's been the superstar down there. We already spoke about it, but very interesting to see if Logan McDonald needs that year or two in the back line.
Yep.
I would have thought if it doesn't work out for him that he'd be asking to go home, though. So there's a bit of risk in there.
And also, if you have a look at where they sort of fell away at the back end of the season, where they fell away from a statistical side of things, they were 13th for handballs per game. So they like to kick the ball and use the ball by foot, get it moving that way. They were 13th for tackles, so they're not leading their opposition to the ball. They're doing a lot of the chasing. And even from a clearances perspective as well, too, they were 12th for that as well. So they weren't getting their hands on the ball. So it was almost where they had the ring of Rosie, you'd almost say, where they would sort of sit outside the contest. Ruck would come down. They would sort of see what happened. So there's that. They're not tackling as much. They might have one in the coalface, but then they're willing to concede the clearance, but sort of get the ball on the turnover on the outside and then run it back the other way. I wonder if Coxie's going to change that, whether you're going to see a little bit more handball, because that is now what teams are doing, taking that ball through the middle of the ground and trying to run it through. Is that how he's going to adapt the game style? Because when it comes to footy, you need to move it fast, you need to be contested beasts, and you need to tackle as well too. And they just weren't tackling enough. And so I think I want to see a little bit more, not taking the game on as much, because it does go back the other way quite quickly. But I think they just need to find a little bit more balance. And I wonder if handballing the ball is going to allow them to have that. Be interesting to sort of see how they go. And that's why I'm a little bit sus on how they're going to go this year. I still expect them to play finals, but I still think they're going to be in that, bottom part of the top 8.
Well, look, I think the perennial question about Sydney, and you mentioned that they lost so many grand finals, and to be honest with you, I think Luke Parker was the only legacy player from 2012 flag.
Yep.
So they don't have any flag players there, and most of the players from last year's grand final, that was either the first or the second time. And I think the perennial question for Sydney is that in the home and away season, they play all these games on the dinky little SCG. Yep. I mean, think about how many batsmen have a good average at the SCG, because you're flogging boundaries and sixes all day with the short boundaries. So the Swans have got a style that they play at home, very, very hard to beat.
Yep.
And then when they go on the road, because they're a better team than a lot of the teams they're facing, they win a lot more than they lose. And then they get to the MCG on the big day and they get pantsed. And I don't think there's any. I mean, the MCG is not actually the biggest ground in the country, but one thing that AFL has never managed to really do, and it's getting better, is have uniform stadiums.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't mind that. I think you've got to have a bit of a nuance. Like, you go to Geelong, you've got straight wings. No one really worries about that. You go to, Optus Oval is massive. The MCG is a circle. It's literally wide as it is long. So I think you have to have those nuances. I don't want grounds to be all the same. Like the baseball in the US, every stadium's a little bit different. You have to just adapt to it. My thing is that when you have... Pardon?
Every new stadium that comes in is much more uniform.
Yeah, it's more uniform from a sizing perspective in terms of probably length and width. We need a minimum of this.
Yep. West Coast Eagles have got 2 ovals. Their facilities are second to none, even better than Collingwood's. Mineral Resources Park, they call it, so the mining.
Miners Park.
And they have, their second oval is the same size as the MCG, because their ambition is to win grand finals.
Yeah, Essendon do the same. Essendon, if they're playing at Marvel, train on the Marvel size ground. If they're playing at the MCG, they've got an MCG size ground. So the clubs are smart when they've got the room to do it. And they look amazing as well too. But you were
Hoping
talking
the
about
Swans have a big ground strategy.
you need
And
to have big ground strategy. And that's where the kicking game will work. But you need to get the clearances to get it as well too. But they're, like I said, they're not that high from a turnover perspective either. So they're an interesting. They love to get their hands on the ball first, and they just like to kick it around. They like to chip it around. They'll move it. They'll switch it. They'll cut their way through. But teams can sort of float back a little bit and flood their 50. They need to probably move it a little bit quicker, especially when you have a look at their double ups. So their double ups for this year, Port Adelaide. You could almost say that's a 50-50, depending on where it's being played. Fremantle, I'd say that's a 50-50. North Melbourne, they should win both of those. But you've got to remember last year they almost won that game against Sydney, except for an interchange infraction. GWS, so the Battle of the Bridge will be a cracker this year because these teams are almost in the same spot now. With all the injuries that are going on with GWS, they're not going to have a fast start like they normally would. Essendon, I've been really critical of Essendon, and I still am really critical on Essendon, but I just saw some signs in their last practice match which made me go, okay, there are some signs here. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. A bit of caddy, a bit of caco, but it needs to be standing up in the big time, not just a Mickey Mouse game. And then you got Brisbane.
A big game every now and then, aren't they, the Bombers? And if you've got 90,000 screaming fans at the G, it doesn't matter if you're playing one of the better teams.
No, it doesn't.
That crowd is the 19th man or 19th person, and they could very easily spring some upsets. So yeah, I mean, Sydney's got it rough.
Yep. They've got 11 games at the SCG this year as well too. Let's just say that they win 9 of those. They're going to have to pick up 4 wins somewhere else. And they should be able to do it against, Richmond, North, and a number of those lowly teams. So they'll play finals. I just think there's teams in a better position and have a little bit more firepower. And their defense is a little bit younger and a little bit more proactive in the way that they move the ball than they are. So I'm still particularly finish in the top 8, but around about that 5th down.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the Lions won the whole thing from 5th last year.
Yep.
It's doable. I don't see them dominating again in that way. And the old axiom, the hunters become the hunted. Everyone's going to want to go after them. And I think Cox is going to be much the same. But if you're going to try and bring in some new game plan strategies, you're going to get found out.
Yep.
And if the game plan that they shift to works early and then starts unraveling as opposition coaches kind of figure them out, then it's sort of tooling around with it on the run that you got to worry about. But their coaching staff is pretty stellar. It's
pretty stellar, and their percentage at the end of the year was 127%. So they scored, and they scored really heavily as well too. Hey, you know what's also an interesting percentage figure? 89%. Do you know what 89% is?
I think it might be something to do with people who don't hit the subscribe button.
That's exactly right. 89% of our viewers on our last video have not subscribed to the channel. So can I ask a massive favour for all of you here? Could you do me a favour and just touch that little subscribe button down below? Just give it a little tappy tap, 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 tap. And that would mean a lot to me and a lot to the team here at Lace Out, because it just means that our audience grows. And when our audience grows, it means that we're able to get bigger guests, produce more content for you, just like these season previews, just like the weekly show, just like our tips that we'll be bringing to you every single week. So it would be great if you could just give it a bit of a tap. You'll get the content delivered to you because it's Lace Out and it's how you want your footy. Hey, I'm a little bit excited by this team because they've brought a lot of milkshakes to the yard, especially Mr. Harley Reid last year. A lot of expectations on them, and you know who I'm talking about, Tommy. I'm talking about our guys, the Wet Toast Eagles. Now, one thing that I need to mention when it comes to West Coast is simply this. When it comes to West Coast, they need to have a bit of a think about one thing, and it is this. For West Coast, it takes a community to raise a child, and I want them to keep this in mind because it was 1986 when Eddie Murphy starred in the abhorrent movie titled The Golden Child. In 2024, we saw the embarrassment that was the cult-like treatment in Perth of the West Coast Eagles' own golden child, Harley Reid. Now, for a team that were 17th for marks, points, and 18th for kicks, handballs, disposals, uncontested disposals, and effective disposals per game, they need to shut up, nut up, and get back to putting in the hard work. But Harley cannot do it all by himself, and he needs the support of Liam Baker, Oscar Allen, Elliot Yeo, Jeremy McGovern, and Liam Ryan to get the Eagles back to their formidable force that they have been for most of their existence. New coach Andrew McWalter has a lot of mouths to feed, but if the entire group can bring a plate to match day, maybe West Coast won't be starved for success for too much longer. Your thoughts, Tom?
That the Perth media, they're dreadful. But it's a different beast. We don't actually get too much exposure because I'm not going to pay subscription to the West. But what does sort of leak out, and what was he? He was Reid was on the front cover 55 days in a row. Yep. If the West Coast fans were all over the place when it was coming to the end of that season,
it's the closest
the 100 Cup and
it's the closest thing that we have, isn't it? It's the closest thing that we have to the English tabloid newspapers over here.
Australia's pretty competitive with them. In South Australia, they're pretty crazy with. I mean, Kane Collins. What more do I have to say? His father was just like that, and still is. We don't tend to have his father in our social media feed every 5 seconds. But look, talking about the West Coast, it kind of feels weird to talk about the West Coast finishing bottom three yet again, because for all of their existence, they've been flying high. And if you remember the last time,
I like it.
I kind of did. Well, the Eagles were flying high. But
don't do
the
that
last
again.
time when they went to the bottom, do you remember what happened?
They shot back up and won a flag.
They got Nicholas Natanui at the draft, and they shot back up. So getting a talisman, getting a real player who's going to represent them, he'll be a future Brownlow medalist. He's already showing that he can. I think that was that game against the D's last year when he kind of embarrassed Petrarca, and we know that Clary and Petrarca weren't in their best form, but and it is just one hot take, but that's what the West Coast media machine does. So they're all bullish. They're all the fans are like, yeah, we're going back up the ladder, but you got to have a reality check. They've got to keep on developing the kids. They've got to keep on, trying to improve enough so that those legacy players from their flag can show the kids what it takes to be that top team, what it takes to be that make Optus Stadium that fortress where clubs fear to come, and you got 60,000 screaming fans all cheering for one team. However, there's also that wish to have those veteran players be part of the next finals push, be part of that, and I just don't see it happening.
It's really weird when you have a look at their overall profile. You've got Jamie Cripps, who's sitting on 251 games, right? The next under that is Elliot Yeo. That's it. That's the only people over 200 games. Then you've got Jeremy McGovern, Liam Duggan, Dom Sheed, Jaden Hunt, right? But all of those guys are either 32, 31, or 29 in age. You've also got Tim Kelly, who's there as well, but he's a different type of 30-year-old in the fact that he hasn't had an AFL smashed body for as long as some of these other players as well too. But they've got such a big range of 191 to 104. There's about 12 players there. Everybody else, which is amazing when you look at every other club's list, I don't think I've seen where you've got so many players where I would say 3/4 of their list is literally under 100 games of football. And we're talking about names like Oscar Allen, Jack Petrotelli, Matt Owies, who they brought in, which I think is a fantastic acquisition, just to help out Waterman down forward, help out Ryan down forward as well too. Ruben Gimby, Tyler Brockman, Campbell Chesser, Ryan Marrick, Brady Ho. So they're just getting gains into these kids. Plus bringing in someone like Bo Allen, who they'll absolutely love because he is a WA boy. Their rise, I don't think it's going to be this year, but I don't think that they'll be as embarrassing. Also, they've picked up Liam Baker. So from a standards perspective, he's going to say, look, boys, if you want to take the next step, and when I say next step, not going from a finals, from being low to actually getting our percentage to an even 100% or more, these is what you need to do. They've also brought in Jack Graham as well, another one that they just go, let's go right ahead. And then, like I mentioned earlier too, Matt Owies, he was their third highest goal kicker at Carlton
Blues,
last year.
Yeah.
The Blues moved him on. He's just going to slot in nicely. That was a move I don't understand. Sometimes you've got to look at what someone can do and not always what they can't do. So Carlton are going to have to find another 35 to 40 goals somewhere this year. So I think, from a forward line perspective, if they play Oscar Allen down there all the time, they don't have Jack Darling clogging up that forward 50, you'll have Ryan running around. You're going to be in a really, really good spot as well too. So I think that they're going to be okay. You got Harley Reid bursting through the middle. They'll have their McGoverns and so forth down back to sort of solidify that. They're not going to be the worst team this year. They will get blown away several times. But I think going over to Perth this year is going to be a little bit like it was 4-5 years ago, where it was like, this is not going to be an easy one. It's going to be harder. And we saw last year they were able to blow a couple of teams off the park over there in WA. I think they'll be able to get some more consistency. But I can't see them winning more than 6 to 8 games at most. But
that can still anchor you to the bottom, can't it? The 6 or 8 games.
Well, that's just the way that we were talking, previously, that there's 18 teams in it. There's 15 teams that can probably make finals.
Exactly, but they're probably not one of them.
Yeah, and they're one of the 3 that aren't going to make it.
Yeah, but the one player I want to highlight that they acquired is a young fella by the name of Sandy Brock.
Yes.
Bit of a late developer, nephew of the late, great Peter Brock.
Mm-hmm.
And he played a year for Peel in the Waffle, but as we know, Freo are pretty stocked up for 12 players. I mean, they delisted Sam Collins. Anyway, obviously after 3 years in the VFL for the Suns, including a flag for the VFL for Sandy Brock, he just couldn't crack it into the first grade team. But they picked him up in SSP at West Coast. He won't necessarily replace Tom Barras, like for like. But if you've got McGovern and Brock together as your key defenders, Brock's a pretty honest key defender who just keeps improving, and he's got about 100 games under his belt already at the second level. So maybe not straight away, but you'll see him this year. I'd also want to mention Job Shanahan, who played for the Bombers in the VFL and got 11 goals in the last 3 games of the season. He's got big hands, clunks marks, and loves goals. So he could even be a defender for them. Whatever they need. So they've got in some good talent. Out the door, we know about Barras, Gaff retiring, Witherden delisted, and Jack Darling going to North, Jai Cullen delisted. There's quite a bit going out the door, but they probably needed it so that they could just refresh. And
they've done it gradually, where Richmond went Chen Kenichi and just got rid of everybody.
Yeah, and good. It's good.
I've got to give a massive shout out to our bloke, Jake Waterman. Besides having the best mullet, anyone who has that with the little tuft, it reminds me of Gary Ayres. Like he sort of came out of nowhere, 53 goals last year. He's going to have another great year. And by having Oscar Allen down there to support him, it just takes that number 1 defender off him. He's going to kick 53 goals. Well, he kicked 53 last year. Is he able to do it again? That is a bit of a question. But, looking at their goal kickers, it was Waterman, Cripps. Darling only had 22. Oscar Allen only had 20. So outside of Waterman, he was double to the next person. So if he goes down, I really think that they will struggle to win any games. They will struggle to kicking a score. But hopefully they'll be able to move the ball a little bit more. McWalter will bring a game style in. They've been very quiet on what they're going to do. So it's going to take a couple of weeks watching them to say, hey, you know what, I can see a change, or it's the same old, same old. But I'll be interested. They had a great game against North on the weekend. There's plenty to like moving forward if they can keep all their players. They need Reid to stay. It's just going to depend what happens with their cousins over in Fremantle. Maybe there'll be a bit of, we need to pick from you, so we'll get a pick over here. We'll send some. There could be some, ducks and drakes, some roundabouts and swings and all that sort of jazz happening with them at the end of the season. But, Tom Cole, he played every game last year. Defender. Cripps, defender. Ruben Gimby on baller. Brady Ho, defender. And, Cripps is a forward, apologies. And Bailey Williams is your ruck. So they only had 5 players, so they didn't really have that much consistency on the park. When you have a look at their double ups, this is where they'll probably, it's not as easy as you would think it would be. They've got Carlton twice. You'd think they'd lose both of those.
Which Carlton goes over there, though?
Exactly. GWS twice.
Ouch. Yeah,
yep. Richmond, they should win those. Fremantle. That derbies are always a massacre, so I can't see them winning those. They beat Melbourne last year, so that is a case of which Melbourne shows up. And then you've got Adelaide.
Bit of a thing about going over to Perth.
Yep. So, yeah, we either get beaten or we win flags. Yeah. So it's going to be like, most clubs are able to split their double ups. They can only probably beat Richmond twice, and they'll pinch one or two other ones out of that mix as well too. So they've got their fair amount of games at Optus Stadium. They've got 12 there. They may win 3, maybe 4 there. They'll probably pinch a win on the road somewhere. So 5 to 6 wins could be for the season. I just don't know. But once again, if their percentage, and that's what I'd be looking for if I was a coach, I wouldn't be looking about what their percentage last year was 68. If that gets to about 80, 85, 90, that's the difference now between winning and losing games is the next step. Just getting those margins down a lot more.
The new paradigm with the 18-team competition, now that it's sort of shaken out, because early doors you had clubs like Hawthorn who were buying players, and they already had a good list, and they won their 3 flags. In teams like Sydney that had got Buddy and had a good list. And then Richmond was a slow burn, but they had a great list, and then they got really lucky at the draft. That's all shaken out now, and there's no obvious team that's going to have a dynasty. I mean, Brisbane will tell you that they have been in the last 2 grand finals, and they may well have a dynasty. Last night I watched their documentary. I don't know if you had a chance to catch that, but it's pretty low. It's Jonathan Brown and half a dozen players and the coach sitting there in a movie theatre watching the grand final and having a laugh.
It would have been over in the first 10 minutes.
But in interesting kinds of stories about how their season developed and how they're dancing on thin ice was the theme, and a bit of Ted Lasso thrown in there for good measure, and they really built that momentum to get that flag. But at any stage that could have blown up in their face, and they could be knocked out of finals. So that's the sort of thing that is happening, I think, from year to year. Is it's a great leveler. To get out of that bottom 3 is a real, and if they even come 16th, but get those 6 to 8 wins, that's fine.
Can I put this in perspective for you?
Get the runs in the legs of the younger players, and you're building for the next couple of years.
Let me put something in perspective for you, Tom. So Adelaide were the 15th team. They had a percentage of 99. They were 31% higher than West Coast. So even with everything that's there in relation to the team itself getting runs on the board, it is still going to be a big jump in scoring power to get it to a place where like they're even competitive from a percentage perspective. So that's what I'm saying. Squeeze that up a little bit and you probably pinch a win here and there. They're just not ready to have both at this stage.
They'll be there in a couple of years.
Yeah, they'll be a couple of years.
Pieces. They're getting players in. You wish that those Western Australian teams had a bit better talent identification of their own players.
Yeah.
There's that many Western Australians who sneak into the draft and come over to the East Coast. But I guess the point is that if they can get those little things, then suddenly players are calling their managers and going, girlfriend's pregnant, want to get back over to the West Coast.
Yep,
so
exactly right.
Raise a kid with the family. And next thing you know, bada bing, bada boom, you got a couple of big names.
And if they got a Baker, Graham, and Owies this year, who could they get next year? That's the sort of thing as well too. So I got them for 17th. I think you've got them around about the same anyway as well too. So
the very, very wildest, crazy scenario would be 14th.
Yep. And another crazy scenario would be for anybody who's watching this not to subscribe to the channel because, like I said, 89% of our viewers on the last video weren't subscribers to the channel, and that's why I'm asking you a big favour. Just do me a favour, and do yourself a favour by clicking the subscribe button and be part of Lace Out. It just means, like I said, we can get bigger as a channel, we can get bigger guests, produce more content for you, because it's Lace Out and it's how you want your footy. Right, last one, our 18th preview for the year, and this is going to be a fascinating one because we're about to have a chat about the Western Bulldogs, and well, you could almost say that from a start of a season, they couldn't have asked for anything worse because it has been all over the place when it comes to injuries, when it comes to off-field, etc. And I think there's only one thing that the Western Bulldogs need to do for their supporters this year, Tom, and they need to stop playing like they're Forrest Gump. Because my mama always said that life is like a box of chocolates. Never know what you're going to get. And when I hear that quote from the 1994 Oscar-winning performance from Tom Hanks, I often think of the Western Bulldogs. Because they did so much right throughout 2024 and then completely fell in a heap in the elimination final loss to Hawthorn. And so much sits on the shoulders of the Bonds, but the rise of Ed Richards in the midfield, Rory Lobb surprising everybody as a backman, the breakout of Sam Darcy offsets a potential Jamara Ugle-Hagan disaster, and the ever-increasing injury toll in the early season. Throw in the $74,000 question that is Aaron Norton a forward or a backman. Backman? I probably agree with you. And then you can toss in a bit of Bevo contract of conundrum, and you think the doggies are more like a legless Lieutenant Dang than the all-conquering Forest. Grab your popcorn because it will be a fascinating watch through season 2025. For the final time, Tom, your thoughts?
Yes. At the time of recording, we have a Category 3 cyclone bearing down on us, and my internet is getting shakier by the minute.
Well, let's punch through this one like an Aaron Norton fist from centre half back where he should be playing.
You know, when your mum says that if your face will look like that if the wind changes, well, the wind's changed a couple of times, and I've had a couple of very unflattering screen freezes. Anyway, look, the Western Bulldogs, they pull your hair out if you're a fan. Every year they're in the 8, they're out of the 8, they're in, they're out. And some years they're in and out in the very last game, and you know, kick one goal here and they're in 8th, and then the other opposition kicks a goal and then they're in 9th. You know, they're very good at coming mid-table.
Yep.
With the talent they've got, Peps, they should not come mid-table, but the talent they just let walk out the door, you know, a couple of flag players, and young Bailey Smith, you know, he was a big deal for them to bring in with a very high draft pick because let's not forget they had to spend so much draft capital on Jamara Ugle-Hagan that they didn't recruit anybody of interest in that year. and the next year they had to spend all of their draft capital, all their picks and points into matching a bid for Sam Darcy.
Yep.
And of course, the rest of the AFL is like, they get given these players for free. Well, that's not how it actually works, Peps. If you've got to spend all of your picks and you can't get those second and third round picks that could turn into your Took Millers or your Ed Richards or your players who they're not that flashy when they're under 18, but they develop into something really special later.
You know what though?
So they've had
can I quickly jump in? Bailey Smith is not a loss. Like I've said this before. I don't think he dominates games. I think if he didn't have a cracking rig and a sexy mullet, we wouldn't be talking about him. I'm dead set. There are so many more players that are so much more consistent and damaging than Bailey Smith. Now, he'll go over to Geelong and he'll, complement that midfield. But I've rarely seen him pull apart a game. The last time I saw him actually do something that made me go, wow, was the ice in the vein games against Brisbane. That got them into the into the prelim of the week after against Port Adelaide. But outside of that, I don't think he's that much of a loss. I think Caleb Daniel's actually a bigger loss, in my humble opinion. Yeah, the way he moves the ball off halfback, and you can already see how it's paying dividends over at North, that's going to be a loss.
He's a Queenslander too,
yeah.
Caleb.
But the big thing that I have with the Bulldogs, though, is their injury list is massive. And we haven't even had round one. Now, here's the thing, right? They had 5 players play every game last year. The Bont, Lockie Bramble, Bailey Dale, Vandermeer, Bailey Williams. Let's go through their injury list right now. Bont, out for 6 weeks. He was their best and fairest winner. He's not going to be there for the first 6 weeks. Bailey Dale, quad. He's a test. He'll probably miss the first week. Liam Jones, so their backline mega man, he's going to be gone for 6. Jason Johannesson, he is getting a little bit old, but he was able to provide that run a little bit more last year, which we sort of noticed a lot. Ed Richards, their gun, who was 5th in their best and fairest last year, he's going to be a test, so 50-50, but hasn't had a preseason. This is the thing. Yes, he's going to be a test, but he hasn't had a full preseason under his belt. We've seen players throughout the year. When you don't have a preseason, you are going to have a delayed start to your season. Even though you're on the field, you're not going to be able to keep up. And what will happen is that the more tired they get, their skills actually start to drop off. And you don't need that at the back end of games. Anthony Scott, Treloar, who came second in their best and fairest, made the All-Australian team with the Bont. He's going to be out for 3 weeks. And Cody Waitman and Riley West, they're two big small forwards who can light up the room and can kick 2 or 3 each a game. Well, Waitman's out for 10 weeks and Riley West is a test. So they're starting so far back and we haven't even started. Add in all the Jamari Ugle-Hagan stuff that, we're not going to go into. But now their forward line goes from looking super dangerous. Their midfield, their 2 big movers in the midfield of Richards and Bontempelli. The guy down the back in terms of Liam Jones, Batman, who's been as stable for the entire year, followed up with Bailey Dale. They're going to have gaps in the forward half, gaps in the middle, gaps down back, and you only have to have, so many gaps and things, it goes from a small leak to a rush, a flow. And I can see it either getting scored against or the ball getting out really quickly. I'm worried about them for their first 5 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks.
You just mentioned that all of those players who are all best 23.
Yep.
Their highest rated, 3 highest rated players, Bont, Treloar and Bailey Dale. Fit. It'd take me less time to tell you who's fit.
Well, can we go one step further? Have a look at their goal kickers for last year. Their biggest goal kicker was Ugle-Hagan. So he had his 43 for the year. He won't be there for the first, you'd say confidently, the first 6 to 8 weeks. Confidently.
He has no preseason.
Right? No, he's had no preseason. Right. Sam Darcy's 38. A lot to have on a third-year player. Norton.
The VFL doesn't start for weeks, so he's not even going to get on the park this month.
Nope. Norton, 35. Still, but not reliable when it comes to big games like Ugle-Hagan. Right. Then you had the Bont kicking 32. Well, we know he's going to be missing at least 6 weeks. So there's some issues there. Who was next? Cody Waitman. He kicked 27. He's not going to be there for 10 weeks. Oh, who was underneath him? Riley West. He's going to be a test, but he may not be there for a week or two. Keep going down. You wouldn't believe who was after him. Adam Treloar. And he's not going to be there for another 3 weeks. And, you're not going to believe it, Ed Richards is there as well with 11. So the whole point is you've got gun players in really important spots who kick goals for their team who are not going to be there. Where are you going to find your scoring power? Because they didn't bring any in. They brought in Matt Kennedy, which is a nice little top up for them. But there weren't any other big goal kickers that they brought in because they thought they'd have everybody ready. I'm really concerned about them. And I did have them at one stage to finish in the 8th. I've got them finishing 15th.
Yeah, that's about where I got them now.
15th.
I had them middle 6, so maybe 12th at worst, but possibly scrapping in. But all these injuries, I mean, they're going to have to do a Brisbane if they're going to have a shot out to the year. They're going to be chasing that all year, and I don't know if they've got the depth to do it.
Well, they've got some precedent on their side where things have worked really well for them. So, as an example, you had Hawthorn had a 0-5 start, made finals. You had Sydney had a 0-6 start, they made finals. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go 0 and whatever, but what I'm saying is that they are going to be on a negative ledger after the first 6 weeks. And if they can square it, awesome. If they can get in the positive, unbelievable. Yes, you're going to get some games into kids. We're seeing that at Carlton as well with Walsh being out. So somebody else is going to be able to come in, which we thought was going to be Jagger Smith, but he's hurt himself. So you're going to be able to blood some kids into this as well. Now, whether that's going to be someone like a Cooper Hines or a Lockie Jacks or a Josh Doolan, we don't know yet. But this might actually be a blessing in disguise because you know, if you put enough pressure on a piece of coal, it turns into a diamond, my friend. And one of these new pieces of coal that they've just acquired could actually be hiding a diamond. So it might work out for them. But yeah. And then it goes another layer. What does that happen with Beveridge then? If he has a bad year and they don't make finals again, even though they did last year and they got humiliated in that elimination final, if they don't make finals this year, what do you say? Because their list is really talented, but they just can't. Because you're right, you've spoken about this before. They're not a consistent top 4 finisher. They're always in that sort of bottom half, and then they work and grind their way to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th weeks in September.
Mm-hmm. Well, they do have a lot of A-graders, and they do have that ability to win the big games. Last year, we saw this game, you know, the cliche game of 2 halves. We saw them get out to a big lead and then get run down in the end of the game. Yep. So if they can't even do that, it's going to be a worry. I will read out a couple of names to look out for. Cooper Hines is a first-round pick for them, so I think they might have got him in exchange for Baslenka.
Yep.
Jordan Croft, second-year player. We'll see what he can do. Big boy, but they're going to need big boys. Maybe he can fill in defence with Rory Lobb. Riley Sanders, second-year sophomore season for him.
He looks mint. Like, out of a lot of the second yearers, he looks... He's almost like, you know when I say the puppy fat? It's almost gone. Like, he's now got a mature AFL body, not just a draftee's body. He looks hard, which is great.
Yeah, he grew up a bit, didn't he? And, I mean, he copped a lot of stick from social media when he had his tantrum at being subbed out and then he got dropped. Yeah. But still, you know, he played 14 games. And in a club that's playing, finals, to make it into a team in your first year is that's a pretty big achievement, and he'll be raring to go. Someone who hasn't played and been blooded at the level, who they will need, is Jed Bustlinger. Okay. In his draft year in WA, and it's another example of WA clubs not picking their own players. He was doing everything. He was champion.
Yep.
He was really good, and. So for him to be flapping around in the VFL for Footscray, seems like a bit of a waste, but they probably don't have much of a choice.
No, they don't.
They're going to have to,
And I agree. And I think that's where Sanders might actually, the Colonel might actually stand up in the Bont's absence.
Yeah.
What have you got to lose? Or put him on a wing, do whatever, but just play the kid. You know he can play. Otherwise, you wouldn't have picked him in the draft the year before. And from all reports, he's been dominating. And you have a look at some of their statistical side of things last year. You don't realize how good the Dogs were for a lot of the year, and then it just went south. They love to handball. They love to run. Where we spoke about Sydney, where they like to kick the ball through. They like to run and gun it. They're not afraid to go back. They have that kamikaze style. They were fourth for points, so they did score really heavily last year, but we've sort of highlighted a few of the challenges there. And they had the most inside 50s per game as well too. But when you've got Richards and the Bont not being there, Bailey Dale bringing it forward, you haven't, all the things that they excelled in last year, are they going to be able to bring it forward this year? Can they actually repeat that? I don't think so. But when you got someone like English and Darcy, yet they were still 15th for hitouts. So I think English needs to step his game up as well. They do like to take risks. That's why they had 15th. They were 15th for clangers as well too. So they made a lot of them. And they had a lot of rebound 50s as well. So the forwards didn't do enough to keep the ball in. So I think that there's some work that the Doggies need to do. Just get through that first 6 weeks. It's almost like, an opening batsman just needs to see the shine off the new ball, the first 10 to 12 overs, and then, set yourself, see off that challenge, and then start to build an innings. These guys need to probably see off the first 6 weeks and then build a season after that. And if they can do that and start ramping up, like you mentioned, start ramping up towards that back end of the year, we could be looking like fools, and they could be pushing for that top 8 and maybe a little bit higher and seeing the fruits of their labour. Ugle-Hagan I would actually say if he came back, it'd be a bonus. I wouldn't count on him.
No. And there's a lot more to that story to be sort of, revealed.
Yep.
There's so many pressures on this team. The injury list is a huge pressure for their, round one, what the team looks like, and can they perform? If they can snatch a couple of wins in that first 6 weeks, then that's gold.
Yep.
But I just don't see them being able to get out of the blocks. Bevo is under massive pressure. The kind of pressure that they decompressed the situation in Port by saying, all right, we're having a transition year. They decompressed the situation in Sydney by Horse retiring on the off season after a successful season, and Freo have now added a new employee instead of. We'll see what JL's KPIs look like, and he'll have to front up to HR and
exactly
if he's going to have his contract extended year on year. Bont has no guarantees and could be gone by mid-year.
He'll be at Melbourne next year.
Sorry, did I say Bont? I meant Bevo. Bevo.
No, Bont will be at Melbourne next year. You heard it here first.
Bevo's going to get sacked if they go in.
I reckon Bevo won't be a person who'll walk away. He'll say, "You got to sack me."
He's already said it, yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder though. The players you're either really close with him or you're not, and how many of the close ones will go if he goes? I don't know. I've got them for 16th. You've got them for
bottom six.
All right.
They're double digits in the team.
I still think they'll win.
Double ups.
Yes, they're double ups. Sorry. Great work. They're ski double ups. They're ski double ups with Lee Smiley. St Kilda. Well, Max King's out for a bit now, so I reckon they'll win both of those. North should win both of those. Brisbane, split them. Essendon, split them. I reckon they might be, because I'm looking at start of the year, end of the year.
We're probably thinking that they're about the same.
Yep. These two punch the living suitcases out of each other, GWS, and then Freo. They've got an interesting mix for their doubles. I'll tell you what, it is not going to be easy. But I'll tell you what has been easy, Tom. Talking to you to discuss the 18 teams and their outlook for a huge 2025 season. And that is our wrap-up for the 2025 season outlook /previews for all 18 teams in the AFL for season 2025. I need to give a massive shout to the man on my right. That's the great man, Tommy Rampaging Roker, who has been sensational in his analysis. He has been my Robin to my Batman, my, as I would say to Jamie, my Lance Bass to this Justin Timberlake, my friend. But we want to make sure that everybody, if you've loved what you saw today, like, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, be part of the Lace Out family. We go live every Monday night, 8 p.m. Me and the J-Dog will be kicking it off really this week after the first couple of opening round games, because half the opening round has been cancelled. So there won't be much to talk about. So we'll be coming up with some stuff. But more importantly, thank you for watching. Hope you've liked the series. And more importantly, Tommy, you have a great year. And I've got one question, and one simple question to ask you, and it is this, my friend, Rampaging Tommy Roker, all the way up there in Queensland, preparing for a cyclone. How do you, my friend, want your footy?
Well, Peps, you can see those videos where someone kicks it into a howling gaze and it almost goes through the goals, and then the wind picks it up and sends it back over their head. That's not how I want my footy, but if I was going to be playing in the next couple of days, that's probably how the footy would be coming my way. But with you, it's always lace out.
Lace out. Exactly right. There we go.